Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Mikael Owunna, who's a queer Nigerian-Swedish American multimedia artist and engineer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His work explores the intersections of visual media with engineering, optics, blackness, and African cosmologies. His work seeks to elucidate an emancipatory vision of possibility that pushes African people beyond all boundaries, restrictions, and frontiers. He's the author, most recently, of Limitless Africans, which was published in 2019, which looks at the intersections of one being an immigrant, African, and queer in North America and Europe in this particular moment. His work will be on display this spring at the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh. And he also has wonderful Duke connections as a Duke alum, earning an undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering and history at Duke University. It's a pleasure to be joined by you today.
Likewise, it's amazing. Thank you.
So let me just start with the engineering piece, right? Because, typically when we think of students who go through engineering programs, we don't expect them to come out the other side as these extraordinary artists. So talk a little bit about what it was like for you, what your road was to becoming an artist and how engineering and technology factored into that.
Yeah. First of all, again, thank you so much for having me on here. This is such an honor and pleasure, particularly as a Black Duke alum, to be in conversation with you. So for me, I studied at Duke in the Pratt School of Engineering from 2008 to 2012. And my road into the arts actually came from the tension between my queer experience and my African experience. And so in the fall of my freshman year, I actually went back to Nigeria, and I'd been outed previously. And when I was in Nigeria that winter, I actually was put through a series of exorcisms due to my sexuality. Wow. And so dealing with kind of that trauma and the tension between those identities, when I came back to Duke, I was struggling, and went kind of into the spiral of depression and anxiety, struggling with these two facets of my identity. And 6 months later, before I did the Duke and Oxford program, one of my friends was like, we should get a camera and take pictures while we're in Oxford. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna get a camera. And when I found the camera, I felt like I found my voice again too. And so I started doing photography just as for kind of that space of identity exploration for myself, all through college. And so I was still getting my engineering degree simultaneously. And so I think the two journeys have kind of just been in one due to kind of also my personal experiences had happened at the same time during college. And so I think with the engineering, I wasn't sure how it had an impact on my work really until my most recent series, where I built my own flash that only transmits ultraviolet light. And then I use that actually to reframe and to transfigure black bodies into cosmic vessels. So I think that's when the engineering kind of finally started to be like, okay, I actually am using it. Because I wasn't sure if I was using it before. Yeah.
Yeah. I read an interview with you and you talked about talking to family members in Nigeria and them telling you that to be Black and queer was un-African. And I want to pair that with, another aspect of the immigrant experience, that you go to elite schools like a Duke for the purpose of graduating as a doctor, as a lawyer, as an engineer, right? There's always been this thinking that immigrant families don't send their kids to these schools that come out as visual artists, right? Or performance artists, actors, and things of that nature. Talk about those dual tensions between what you chose professionally in your life and obviously your sexuality.
Yeah, so I think that is definitely another tension, right? So actually when I went to Duke, I didn't want to study engineering. I wanted to study biochemistry. And I was told, oh, that's not a good enough degree, biochemistry. So
Wow.
That's why I ended up in biomedical engineering was because of that. And so when after I graduated, I did a Fulbright scholarship. And then when I came back, I had thought about doing engineering beforehand, kind of professionally, but it just, I didn't really want to. And so I ended up actually working in, I tried a consulting internship. I didn't enjoy it. I worked in marketing for several years. I was kind of at my day job while I was building my photography career. And then when I went full time with photography in 2017, I think my family was kind of like, what is going on? Like, what is happening here? And I think they didn't really see anything with the photography until I was published in the New York Times for my Limitless African series. And they're like, oh, New York Times, okay. But then even now, people still are like, oh, when are you going to get a real job? You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, it's like, okay, you're in museums, you're in this, you're in that, but oh, you're not a doctor. Oh, you're not a lawyer. Your career is not legitimate. So I think that is something that just is ongoing even right now.
It's interesting, particularly with the Limitless project. You mentioned the ways in which your own identity, ethnic nationality, and obviously your queerness, and photography, as a kind of lens to work through that, but also the narrative piece, right? That you got from history. Talk a little bit about your background, because it wasn't just engineering, it was also history. But what it was about that background and your training in that regard that gave you the comfort to go across 10 nations as you did, to find versions of yourself, which are really, when all is said and done, versions of who Black people are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question, because I think most people, when they talk to me, they just only ask about the engineering. People aren't interested in the history background, which is interesting. But yeah, so like when I studied in history, I was focusing at Duke specifically around identity formation. So I was thinking about, for example, how Native American communities devastated by genocide and epidemic diseases in their new homelands, et cetera, when they kind of created these syncretic identities, how did those new kind of cultural formations come to be? Also thinking about, for example, with white people coming to the United States, Irish people, Italian people, and kind of them becoming white. So kind of thinking about ethnogenesis and identity formation. So that was kind of the focus of my work at Duke. So I was always kind of thinking about identity really specifically. And so I think that was really what really sparked my interest when I did my first photography project in Taiwan. I was working with Taiwanese Aboriginal youth, and I was teaching them photography as a space for them to explore their own cultural identity and to tell the story of their community. And that then translated into the Limitless African series of thinking about, okay, there aren't really many documents of LGBTQ Africans, specifically in diaspora. How do I create an archive to, that people can then look at 20, 30 years from now to continue building upon that work going into the future? And so I didn't have that archive for myself, and I knew that would have been helpful for me struggling with my identity. And so I wanted to build that archive. And so the book has the photos, but it also has the narratives in French and English. And so I think the history was so crucial in that, and because my focus around identity has been there from the beginning, and that training at Duke was so crucial for that.
What kind of reaction did you get when you started, talking to folks around the globe about this project and what you were hoping to gain from it?
So in terms of talking to other LGBT Africans?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there was two different types of reactions. When I was reaching out to people to be in the series, some people were super excited about the work and were really enthusiastic about participating in the work. Other, probably larger contingent were like, oh, I love this work. This is so important. I don't feel comfortable being publicly out myself.
Right, because there's still folks like you talked about your own experience. Like there's still folks who are still working through the ambivalence of what it means to be out, in these spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think those are kind of the two types of reactions that I got. But I think overall, I think people were really enthusiastic about there being a space created specific to like an LGBT first and second generation African immigrant experience that really interrogated this idea of, what doesn't mean to be African or un-African. How does that lie in relationship with ideas of colonial ideas of African identity? And then also thinking about pre-colonial African sexuality and gender. So I think the book also, I also did a lot of pre-colonial African research to connect the dots. I think that was what a differentiator for the project was too, was that kind of historical aspect of it.
And I mean, because we often hear narratives here in the U.S. when thinking about, this Africa, the antiquity, right? That somehow, that African sexualities weren't more complicated than we'd like to believe them. And so the project, I think, does some wonderful work to recover those sexualities from that period of time. At the same time, obviously acknowledging people who exist in this moment. Were there any surprises, in talking to folks, that things that you talked about with folks that just quite frankly surprised you, in talking and dealing with their narratives?
So there were a few moments. I think there was some that were. So I think on one side of the spectrum, there were some people who I was really stunned by the level of brutality that they had to endure. For example, one of the narratives in the book actually shares a story of a gay Somali asylum seeker who had to flee from Somalia because he was outed to Al-Shabaab. And so kind of thinking about that level of violence and his fear of going back and being killed by potentially members of his own family, I think that was also a way of thinking about the levels of access and privilege, right? And so because you have people who have legal status in this country, I have legal status in this country, my family is educated, I went to Duke, you know what I'm saying? And there are people who who are undocumented, who are asylum seekers, who are not allowed to work while they're in the asylum seeking process. And so I think thinking about those levels of gradation of LGBT African immigrant experience, I think was a big eye opener for me, a really, really big one. It's not just this homogenous, we're all dealing with this. There are levels to it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Your most recent work, Infinite Essence, takes on, another issue of urgency in this moment, anti-Black violence. For many people who know your work, they probably do simply because of the striking images that you created in support of this project. Talk a little bit, and you did a little bit earlier, but talk a little bit more about the process of creating these images and why it was so important to present Blackness in the way that you did in this moment, whereas you say, Blackness, the Black body serves for a trope, for death, in many ways, in the Black imagination and obviously, of course, in the white imagination.
Yeah. So after the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, I was really, really struck by how his body was left in the street for hours, and literally for public display. And then the media took pictures of his body and then published it across the world without the consent of his family. And I think just seeing the body and just how the body was just so desecrated, lynched, desecrated, kind of this history that we have. It made me start thinking about that association between the Black body in the contemporary moment and death, just kind of that localization. And then we have just again and again, it would just be like constantly images and videos of Black people being shot and killed, George Floyd, Philando Castile. I mean, I think the list just goes on, and Tamir Rice, you could just, there's so many people we can't even name them all.
Right.
And so I started thinking about, okay, as an artist and engineer, how can I think about responding to that by reimagining the Black body, transfiguring it into, at the beginning, I described it as kind of this space of magic, but I think it's more so about understanding Blackness as not just a flat sociopolitical construct, but from an African cosmological construct as this divine cosmic principle of the universe. Blackness as the essence from which all life emerges, from which the universe emerges. And so kind of thinking about our bodies as Black people in conversation with the cosmos and our African cosmological system. So in terms of the process, what I did was I actually hand paint the models' bodies with fluorescent paints. And then, this is before going into the photo shoot, and then I built a flash that only transmits ultraviolet light. I cut the lights, and then in total darkness, I click down on the shutter. The ultraviolet light illuminates their bodies for a fraction of a second, and that creates this fluorescent effect that then is captured on the camera sensor. And so that's the effect called ultraviolet induced fluorescence that produces the images.
Do it to the side though.
I mean, how long did it take for you to experiment, to come up with this innovation?
So I would say that it was about a 6-month process of like kind of really seriously testing and experimenting and testing and experimenting. I mean, I tried light painting at first, where I would like run around with lights, and then I tried projectors. I was trying all these different things. And then even when I was able to develop the kind of build the flash and the paints and stuff, I tried tribal paint. So I think it was just a lot of different methods in the serial testing to try to get to the space where I am now.
Yeah. What was the aha moment, right? What was the moment when you were doing all this experimentation? You were like, this is it.
So the big aha moment came about a month after Trump was elected in 2016.
Ironically,
right? And then I just finished doing a photo shoot where I tried to do like light painting, and then I just finished a projector shoot, and I really didn't look at it like the work, and I was like, this is not speaking to me. And so what I did was actually I returned to so I guess two things were happening. I was also doing research around Igbo spirituality. And so I was reading the work of Chinua Achebe, who was his discussions of the chi, and the chi, which is our spirits, if you will, in the Western context, our chis being all one ray of the infinite essence of the sun. And so I was like, huh. I was like, okay, that's one thing. Okay, we have the chi, okay. And then I was like, okay, well, how do I illuminate that idea of kind of almost trying to capture the spirit, that spirit body, the chi of the individual? And I returned actually to an image from when I was in high school that I really loved, because when I was in high school, I went to boarding school for high school. I was the only out Black queer person there, of course. Basically had no friends. I mean, it was just a mess, And so I felt very isolated then. So whenever I was feeling isolated there, I would play or watch Final Fantasy, which is like this fantasy video game, Japanese fantasy video game. And they had a lot of magic in the game. And so they would have like kind of these like sparkles and these energetic auras forming in the hands of these creatures, and they would like shoot them. And so I went back to one of those clips from high school, and I was watching it again and again and again and again. And I was seeing those sparkles form. And then literally I had like a voice came to me, and a voice said to me, put the sparkles on the body. I was like, okay, I got you. So let me. So then I started thinking about it. Okay. Then I started looking at glow in the dark paints, and I was like, I'm not sure glow in the dark, because there's a green. And then I started going from glow in the dark paints to fluorescent paints, and then I started learning about this category of photography, ultraviolet photography, which people use. You can see it, for example, in like people go to like blacklight parties, and saying stuff like that. So it's like, okay, how could that then be a vehicle to illuminate the Black body as these cosmic vessels? And so that's how I kind of went into that moment, was from that thinking about Igbo spirituality, and then seeing the magic that had really been a space of inspiration for me as a high schooler.
Your work is going to be on display at the Contemporary Art Museum of Raleigh. I guess a homecoming of sorts. How are you processing this particular moment in your career?
I'm super excited. I've not had a museum show before. So this is my first museum show. So I'm super excited about it. I'm also really excited about the way we're going to play with medium in the Contemporary Art Museum Raleigh show. So, rather than, people of course will see it in person, but typically I actually print my work up to 40 by 60 inches. But in the Raleigh show, it's going to be a 12-foot by 6-foot mural of one of my pieces. So that's going to be, I think, what I always strive to do with my work is to create an experience where Black people can kind of really connect with themselves as being these divine cosmic vessels, and almost this sense of awe at the grandeur of Blackness. And so that scale, I feel, is really important. So I think that's what I'm really excited about, to see how do audiences respond to this new medium, and how can that be a vehicle to, you know, spread these messages of the cosmic nature of Blackness. So I think I want to see, I'm curious, like how people are going to respond.
Yeah, and that's an interesting trend, right? And when you think about Kahinde's work, you know, in terms of the scale, how Kara Walker's work, you know, when you see it on the page, it's one thing, but when you're actually encompassed by these black and whites, you know, because of the scale of it, it's a totally different experience. What's next for you after this?
Yeah, so I actually just finished shooting my first film, which is in the Infinite Essence universe. And so going into editing soon. But I'm excited to share that work later this year. And then also there are some new photographic works from the Infinite Essence universe that are in conversation with really specific mythologies that I'm also excited to be sharing. So I think those are the two major pieces of the film, which is kind of my first dally in that direction. And then some new photographic works coming up too.
Well, we will definitely look forward to having you back on Left to Black when those projects drop sometime in the future.
That would be an honor. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black, everything black, culture over everything.